Hi students, this is video 15 on aquaculture and fisheries. So when you think about aquaculture, you probably think about water and maybe fish farming. So here's what a fish farm might actually look like. In Asian and African countries is where most of the animal protein that they eat is fish. So that's where most of the fish consumption is. There's been a huge increase in fish farming production, and there's been a huge decrease in the number of wild-caught species, mainly because we're over-harvesting those. If you go to the grocery store, it's going to be really, really expensive to buy the wild-caught fish, whereas if you see something that's a little bit cheaper, it's probably going to be from a fish farm. So this is a tragedy of the commons situation. Remember, tragedy of the commons is a shared public resource is being degraded. So fish are not anybody's property. They're out in the ocean and anybody can get them. And so that has led to a 30% crash in our fish populations, meaning that those species have basically completely gone away. So here's kind of a graph showing you the history of fishing. So back in the 1950s, we had nothing that was collapsed or even overexploited. Most of our stuff was still underexploited. But then we had, industrial fishing processes that came about, new technology, and now we have nothing that is underexploited anymore. So basically everything is fully exploited or overexploited, or it has completely crashed, which means it's collapsed and there's almost nothing left at this point. So here's what it looks like when a fish population collapses. So here you have sardines, and their collapse happened right around, it was happening in about the mid-40s, and then in 52 there was basically nothing. And the line hovers around zero, and eventually it will kind of sort of come back up, and maybe eventually it can get back to what it was. But the problem now is going to be genetics, because you had so few species and there's not a whole lot of genetic diversity here. Same thing with the northern cod. So this did not actually collapse until about the 80s. But again, their species is basically gone. So we can harvest fish with different methods. These are all industrial agriculture fishing methods. So we can have fish cages. This is your aquaculture over here. A trawler is a net that goes behind a boat and catches them. It can be a bottom trawler also, so it can scoop all the way on the bottom of the ocean, and it basically takes the entire bottom with it as it goes. You can use sonar, which is sound imaging. So we literally beam sound waves down into the ocean. We can see schools of fish, and then you can use that to help you catch them in these nets. We can use purse seine fishing, which is basically you send out a net it would not be closed initially, but eventually it's going to close all around and create a bowl for these fish. You can do long line fishing, which is, imagine like if you've ever gone fishing with your, one hook, imagine a really, really long line that has hundreds of these hooks. So that's kind of what we're talking about there. You can have deep sea cages. You can have drift nets that basically float along either with a buoy or another boat is with it, and it catches things that way. So there's lots of different ways that we could harvest our fish. I encourage you to either pause the video and kind of draw some of these things, or go online and print the PowerPoints out, which includes this picture, because it's kind of a lot on this one, and if you don't have the picture, it's hard to understand these. So here's some of the things that we would catch from all these different things. Not necessarily really all that important for you in terms of memorizing, but just to kind of think about, hey, I might eat some of these things. So tuna is really, really popular. That's usually caught with a long line. Trawling gets salmon. That's my favorite fish. Shrimp, if you like to eat shrimp, that's going to be from a trawler. Or from possibly traps, but usually traps are things like crabs and lobster, and other like drift netting is going to be, other different types of fish. So here's a gill or a drift net, just kind of a closer look of that, and basically the fish are getting caught in that net. Here's trawling. So this is what it looks like. If you've watched fishing videos, you might see that they bring it up with a net like this. And here's what the bottom might have looked like before. And then after you've trawled, it's basically a completely destroyed ecosystem. So this would definitely be decreasing our biodiversity. So what are some of the damages? Just like we saw from trawling, destruction of the seafloor. If you trawl along a coral reef or a seagrass bed, you are basically completely wiping out that ecosystem. You're catching fish, yes, but you're also catching a lot of other things. Along with that, bycatch is a huge problem with fishing. So bycatch is anything that you don't want. So they're non-target species, or they're really, really young species that are not going to be worth catching. You have to either throw them back, or more than likely not going to throw them back. They're just going to die. So these sharks have been caught in some nets. Tons and tons of things like turtles get caught in nets. And this kind of shows you the fishing gear that has the highest bycatch rate, and that's going to be long lines, trawls, and gill nets are the things that catch things the most. So again, here's your bycatch by gear. So you have the shrimp trawls along the bottom, in the open ocean. Then you have the bottom trawl. So trawling, you can see, is a really terrible one for catching bycatch. This will be your long line right here. So that one is pretty high as well. Dredging and midwater trawls, these are all going to be things. If you wanted to catch the least amount of bycatch, you would do purse seine or a gill net. So there's also some things that you can do as a fisher to try to not catch these species. There's been some kind of engineering behind some of these things. And right now we have these nets that will actually release the turtles if they get caught in them. So basically the shrimp and the turtles are scooped up by that net. Traditionally, they would just stay in there and the turtles would die. But this device actually allows for, it has basically kind of like a out area where the shrimp go through one area, and then somehow the turtle, I'm not exactly sure how that works, but turtle goes through another area and can get out. And here's a picture of it happening over here. So that's kind of a cool engineering design that we have developed that allows for things to not get caught if they're larger. So going to aquaculture now. So again, aquaculture is either fish farming on land, or we'll get in the water in just a second. So if it's fish farming on land, it's in man-made tanks and enclosures. Usually this is going to be things like catfish, salmon, carp, cod, all those sorts of things. Again, this is on land somewhere. If it's in the ocean, it's called mariculture. And this is where it's out in the ocean. We have enclosures or tanks or something out there. So this will be your saltwater fish more than anything. And this is, flounder, shrimp, oysters, that sort of thing. You can also grow seaweed and kelp, and that's also mariculture. And you can see, this is kind of cool how you can see like the weights down here that are keeping these things set on the ground. So some benefits of aquaculture: it is efficient and very cost effective. It requires very little fuel, so that's good. It also requires a very small amount of water. So you can fish farm off the coast in this little spot instead of having to go out and fish in the entire ocean. There's less habitat destruction. We're not going to be collapsing the species. So that's a really good plus also. So again, here's kind of where we're doing some aquaculture, what species we're growing the most. So clams and oysters. Salmon is a really, really popular one. 41 million pounds of salmon. So this has really skyrocketed all throughout the world. And it's possible that we may not even be catching wild-caught fish in the next 50 years or so. Or at least if we are, it'll be kind of a, oh, I want a wild-caught animal instead of a fish-farmed animal. So there are some drawbacks, though, to everything, as we've seen in this class. One of the biggest ones is fish feces. The waste actually ends up settling in the tank, which can cause a lot of algae to grow, and just kind of water pollution dealing with the fish waste. Also, the feed that we give them ends up being, not all of it is consumed, and some of it has stuff in it that doesn't really need to be out in the water. So that also contaminates the ocean water. You can spread diseases and parasites, just like in our CAFO with our confined animal feeding operations. This is basically a sea farm CAFO. So things like sea lice, can become, very bad within the population. And then you can also have escapees. So invasive species you might be growing a species that's not native to that area, and then if it escapes, it will go out and it will breed with other natives that are from that area, which can cause problems with our biodiversity. So again, here's some environmental risks of aquaculture. One of them also is we have to give the fish antibiotics and drugs because we're trying to prevent diseases in the same way that we're doing with the CAFO. But that can lead to antibiotic resistance that we've seen. So you also have things, so this is all the waste down here that you would see. And if we have GMO fish, well, they also can go out into the wild, and maybe they're better at catching prey than other native fish. So now you're decreasing the biodiversity that way. So if you're concerned about this and you want to make sure that, okay, well, how do I know if the stuff that I'm buying is wild caught, or is it going to be in collapse soon? Are we over harvesting those things? Here's what you can do. There's a seafood watch. It was published in 2007. It is still going on now. And they will label things. They will say, here's best choice, here's good alternative, and here's things to avoid. So if it's something to avoid, that means that either it's pretty much completely collapsed or it's on the verge of collapsing. And so you don't want to be contributing to buying and overharvesting that species of fish. So stick with your best choices and you will be good to go. All right, bring your questions to class.